all, and thank you for joining us today for People Matters and DDI webinar on making the most of a dynamic duo for assessment to development. I am Ritu from People Matters and would take you through the agenda for today's webinar. We have the privilege of having with us Amogh Deshmukh, Head Sales and Marketing, DDI India. A little about today's webinar. This is the third webinar of Global Leadership Forecast 2014-15 webinar series. In this session, we are discussing the top 3 challenges of CEOs and how HR leaders can contribute and act as an active enabler of their CEO's vision. A little about today's speaker. Amogh leads the sales and marketing team at DDI that works with clients in many different industries across India. He has consulted extensively with clients like Aditya Birla, Ambuja Cements, Bharti Airtel, Cadbury, DuPont, Ericsson, HSBC, L&T, Mahindra, Microsoft, and Reliance. He has experience in designing innovative HR solutions for clients that help them link business priorities to human resource, hence deriving performance. The partner for today's webinar for helping us make this program possible is DDI. DDI is one of the top talent management consultancy. DDI helps companies perform the way they hire, they promote, they develop their leaders and workforce. Their clients are some of the most successful companies in the world. They serve clients from 42 DDI-owned or closely affiliated offices. We are also proud to have Conference Board as a research partner for the GLF Study 2014. We have saved time for you to ask questions at the end of the webinar. For those watching the live webinar, you can submit your questions at any time during the presentation through the Q&A tab. We will try to respond as many questions as time allows. We have a full exciting agenda for the webinar today. So without any further delay, I am going to hand over the webinar microphone to Amogh. Over to you, Amogh.
Thanks, Ritu. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, would like to wish everyone a very happy and a prosperous new year. Thank you so much for spending your time with us on this one. What you might have just thought when the invite must have come to you that assessment and development and something which is quite old as far as practices are concerned in talent development or talent management per se, and what DDI really is going to speak differently or in detail about these two. Well, the fact is that I'm not going to talk anything much about how to conduct assessments or development because I think that's really an overused topic. But really want to share some perspective around how we at DDI think these two really work together, and that's where the power is unleashed. And that's what holds up for the next 1 hour. And trying to move the slide. So, many of you must have heard this term, the sum of the parts is greater than the sum on its own. This is what really it is. The parts is really individual parts which on its own can be difficult to understand, but the sum is sometimes much greater than the parts itself. What you see this term is dynamic duo. First time came in with Batman and Robin somewhere in the early 40s. Why they really came up with that, if you really think about why the comic writers decided to do something like that, is because the plot that they created was simply not enough to be handled by one superhero, and that's how two were required. And that's when anytime two great people or great things come together, often we refer to them as dynamic duos. What you see here, how does it really relate to talent assessment and development? That's really a big question, and this is what our perspective is. In today's world, the challenges are big enough for the leaders to really manage on their own, and if they are not equipped enough, they will tend to struggle. And that's where assessments and development, which have been used for decades now, if used together, can really help them get that power, which will help them realize their dream. It's really strongly connected with each other. What you see is often organizations, typically departments will have talent management will split into learning and development and assessment centers or talent diagnostics or whatever it would be. That's really not a wrong structure. I'm not here to comment on the structure per se, but really, just like we talk about departments in our organization working in silos, I really see these two age-old experts being used in their own silos as well. And that's really the problem. One system doesn't really talk to the other. And that's where we're talking about how do you really bring both of them together. What we will talk in the next few slides really is about what are the challenges when these two great heroes work on their own, but when you get them together, how that right mix will help you realize the potential. The Global Leadership Forecast Survey, which is a survey of almost 13,000 leaders, spoke about that really the bench is broken. And imagine that almost 5 out of 10 leaders fail because they are not really equipped to handle the challenges at their level or the next level. And that's where leaders in the organization or HR in organization really puts very less confidence in their ability to grow leaders. And that's what is causing the problem. Now imagine, what if you could improve the quality of these leaders of these organizations? Or what if you could fill up the critical positions from within the organization? What if you could really provide a strong bench? And that's really what DDI research speaks about. You really get a 20% higher than the average as far as the leadership quality and the bench strength is concerned when these processes start working together. 26% more critical positions can be filled immediately, so organizations start having a stronger bench and a succession pipeline. And imagine the financial impact. This is the first time that Global Leadership Forecast and DDI really focused on how do you look at talent practices and financial performances of organization. 2.3 times is the likelihood of organizations having a better financial impact when you start seeing the talent processes working together efficiently. And that's what we are here to really talk about. Now, what's really imperative when you talk about assessments and development? So a PwC research said that leadership capabilities and business strategies are very strongly connected to each other. Unfortunately, most organizations see a business strategy or a business plan put together first, and then a talent plan would follow after the business plan is really put up. What our research and studies talks about is that only 5% of our leaders who are progressive in nature and can really talk the business language, and that's not it, but can see the future as to how the talent needs to shape up to ensure that the organization's strategic priorities are realized, get a seat at the table, and their talent plans actually are embedded in the business plans of organization. We label these people as anticipators, and we spoke a little about this in one of our previous webinars, but it's really about how HR not just becomes a good business partner, not really just talking about that HR needs to understand the business language, but how do you really go beyond that to start seeing some predictions around how will your talent fit in the larger scheme of things when your business landscape starts changing. To give an example, a couple of our client organizations spoke about they had to move their business from X to 3X, or they had to increase their sales force from X to 5X. Now that requires really different kind of leaders. And it's not enough for organization to just look at experiences and performance, but also look at potential to really manage that kind of structures in the organization. And that's where talent leaders have this responsibility to start looking at what's the bench as of now compared to my business strategy, and how do I really go about moving that in the right direction so that by the year 2020, 22, depending on what your organization's goals are, how will my talent really help fit this particular piece up? So how do we really get there? What really we found that's not working in organizations? What we see is typically assessments are used for the following purposes: selection, promotion, maybe succession. Quite a lot of technical qualities and measurements are done, and often we talk about strengths, gaps, and what the initiatives for development efforts would be, and that's really what assessments have been used for. What we see on the plus side is Organizations are spending a lot of time in identifying the right tools, the right levels that need to be diagnosed, the accuracy of it, and how will individuals get good insights. Unfortunately, on the flip side, what we see is that there is overemphasis on getting the assessments activated and initiated in the organization and not really linking that back to any form of development planning, which often leaves leaders with a question as to what next. I think 9 out of 10 organizations who are conducting assessment centers often miss the boat when they start into the communication phase, because organizations do an excellent job on communicating why you are here and why you will get assessed, but really are not able to stitch up the complete picture as to what next as a leader that you see. Once you have identified the true insights around your leadership strengths and gaps, how do you really go about developing them? Some organizations have gone to the extent of building IDPs as well, but really the feedback that comes in from the businesses, IDPs eventually go to the shelf and are never really used afterwards or realized. A study done by DDI separately from Global Leadership Forecast said that if a leadership development plan is executed well, an individual development plan, then the performance of a leader jumps up 4 times compared to somebody who has never actually executed that plan. And that's really how you start linking assessment to development. When you start looking at L&D initiatives, while curriculum is always at the hem of it and a lot of energy is spent on getting the curriculum right, many organizations also get into the action learning, special projects, assignments, and coaching. And that's what you see on the positive side. You see really high quality content development, thought through about, will this really fly for the right audience? Is it holistic learning that we are providing to the people, and emphasis on how do you really apply? But unfortunately, on the flip side, what we see is that so much of energies are put on getting the content right that organizations end up doing poor need analysis. They will usually undercut that particular part and will get it either through word of the mouth feedback or performance development plans, but not really some good primary source of data to understand how do I start building between the gaps the organization has, which then leaves the participants coming into the classroom with a simple question as to why am I in this classroom at this point in time? Do I even need to go through this program? And that's where we start seeing lack of ownership from the participants themselves. And that really builds a lot of liability and vulnerability for organizations, where we start seeing that leader skill gaps aren't really optimally addressed. As a result of that, what we see is that organizations are focusing on wrong development needs and building the wrong leadership capabilities, which really starts putting the initiative down. So if you can imagine a cliff, and organization starts with a great bang, put the initiative up on the block, but then it takes a nosedive. And that's purely because people stop seeing the connect of these development opportunities they are getting, and how do you really go about linking that to the business priorities. The next one is really individual development needs are not recognized or addressed enough. That really starts getting into the ownership problem. So organizations do communication as far as assessment or development well, but really are not talking to the right needs of the target audience. It almost becomes like a generic agenda or one size fits all. That's where leaders start distancing themselves from the development initiatives, thinking this is something not really meant for me, or often asking that maybe this is not something you should do for me, but somebody in my team should attend something like this. The last one really is measuring the effectiveness and the impact, and this is always the tricky one. A lot of organizations ask us, how do I really measure the impact of assessment or development? And really, it's one in isolation of the other can't happen. If you have assessed people and you would want to measure, you need to really develop them so that you can see whether there is a quantum delta. On the other side, if you are developing leaders, you need to have formal and strong assessment ways to really first identify whether we have the right development objectives, and more importantly, are these development objectives linked to the business priorities? and then going back after the development to see whether we are getting any delta in the organization on this. DDI has done quite a lot of research as far as measurement. We have done more than 300 measurement impact studies. Towards the end of the presentation, I will share a success story with you, how a client organization have really used the power of the two superheroes and what has helped them pull out of that. So, why development and assessment really are disconnected in organizations? It could be really, as I spoke earlier, different silos or different disciplines which are not talking to each other. Many times, even organizations who are selecting leaders through various mechanisms don't provide the input post-selection to the L&D team saying, these are the strengths and the gaps that we have identified and help this individual start up on a strong success note. Our research really shows that if organizations start linking selection development, they will start getting better, faster speed to productivity in the organization. So that's where you start seeing all the departments, may it be selection, development, or succession, working in their silos. So what's really the big missed opportunity for organizations? In real simple words, it's about how you could link your leadership capability building to the business priorities. And let's face it, as HR, we all are well versed with competencies, with training calendars, with assessments and the tools. The world of our business leaders is very different, and they don't really care much about anything that I just spoke about. All they care about is, will this person deliver to the results that I have set based on my department and my organizational priorities? And unless we start reporting outputs in the format of business priorities as to why this particular initiative, how will this initiative help you pull which business lever? Business leaders and their department team members will not give complete buy-in to HR, and that's where we start getting the conflict of interest. So how do you really go about integrating the two? And that's what we will speak about based on our experience as to which are some levers that organization needs to pull and few processes that you might have to put in place. Really, it's about why you would want to do that. So who is the target audience? What actions you would like to take on the assessment data. That's an important piece. Not action about just doing assessment or just doing training, but once you have assessed the need, what action would you want to take, and really how much is enough. And that's where the reason we really put this is, it's not about using the word assessment in the true sense of assessment centers. It could be 360 degrees. It could be interview based. It could be focus groups. It could be survey based to identify the need. But what is important is going back to whatever themes have come out and asking an all-important question: are we answering the business priorities? If I go about building a training calendar for these leaders on these priorities, is this going to help me realize the business levers? And that's really what we talk about of business-focused architecture. These are few things which, according to us, help organizations do, solve the problem, identify the stakeholders, really what success looks like. And when we say this, it's little more than just doing a plain training need analysis or gap analysis, but really saying if my organization has to realize building organizational talent, turning around the business, cost efficiencies, revenue targets, how the success will look like in different business priority situations, and really what kind of competence do my leaders require in doing something like that. Based on that, then go about stitching what are the kind of solutions you would want to have. What's critical out here, as you see in the bottom line, is really the governance, accountability, and the sustainability process. DDI research shows that if any of those three are not done well, no matter how robust an initiative is, it will always die its natural death. And that's really how you start getting into the governance process. Start talking the business context. Identify what's critical business drivers or business needs of your organization, and start prioritizing as to what are the growth initiatives you would want to focus on. The third one is important as to how do you set the accountability, and unfortunately, the rule of this game has become that the responsibility and accountabilities of HR. Now from HR, we have moved ahead, and some organizations say, well, it's the responsibility of the participants themselves to develop themselves. But what is important is getting your accountability right at the senior sponsorer level. So 3 levels of accountability, as we have seen, works the best. Getting not just a senior sponsorer to come in and sign off or kick off the program saying this initiative is important, but really how much time does a senior leader put on the block to review this initiative with you and stand committed to say, if I see this initiative going down south, how do I pull the lever so that I can make this initiative effective for you? The next is the direct reporting managers of the participants, because they play a big role in this entire piece. Our independent research done spoke about in any kind of development initiatives, manager is the first important person. Not even the participants, not even the facilitators. It's really the managers before the program who will make most impact, and immediately after the program. The participants come fifth on that particular list. So how do you go about priming the managers up to build accountability? Again, talking the business language. 1, what are your business priorities? 2, linking it to what this development initiative is going to do. 3 is their role in keeping this initiative on track. Because once you have identified the gap, offered the development, and in a classic 70-20-10 format, as we talk about, make people work on the job on the 70%, it's really the managers who start becoming the roadblock out there. Now, unless the manager knows his role as a facilitator of change, you cannot really build accountability at the participant level. And that's really the 3 levels of accountabilities I would really talk to you about. Then really define the resources that are available for the participants and what you would want to do in this. As a part of this, one important element I'd like to mention is always think about what are some developmental barriers the participants think they might face, and how will you as a learning organization and their direct reporting managers be the enablers to take those barriers out. Always ensure that you are talking about the barriers towards development, and believe me, many times you will get participants coming back documenting that my primary barrier is getting my time with the manager to review whether I'm on track or not. And that's what we have seen in most of our IDP audits as to what that primary barrier is. There are many which would be conflicting priorities, special projects that a person is working on, high pressure environment as far as seasonal targets and things like that. But it's really about identifying the right barriers and using this governance process to ensure that you are making an enabling environment for learning. Then comes the question really about how really you go about using that assessment data. And the answer is about what do you do with that data itself. And there are different things organizations can do. Many organizations usually just take that data just to find out whether they have a succession bench or not. However, good practices that organizations have shown is straight away linking that back into their development plans and also building a strong journey for the target pool if you have a sustainable pool in that particular level. So how do you really build a development rigor and go about laying down all the building blocks of this journey using the primary assessment data? So these are few things to consider when you are looking at assessment. Obviously, who needs to get assessed? All the first 3 are very common. The 4th one is something I'd like to really focus on, and that's your communication strategy. Again, organizations do an excellent job as far as communicating individuals as to why they are in the development assessment or a training program. But often they miss out the larger picture as to what next, and build the accountability out there. It is on this step 4 that you will start seeing organizations start building stronger accountability with participants and their managers when you have the right communication out. And usually the best practice that we would recommend is start with the communication first with the managers of the participants and then the participants themselves. Because let's look at a reality. When you go about communicating to the target audience that you are a part of this program, who's that first person that they would reach out to asking, why am I picked for this piece? Is that direct reporting managers. And that's the reason why communication strategy becomes all the more important to talk about how managers need to be onboarded in the format that we spoke earlier in the governance piece. The next part really is about the development and how do you really facilitate building a clear individual development plan. And unfortunately, most organizations fail on the first step itself. While many will just muscle their way through to create a good development plan, but when you start auditing those plans towards a SMART objective, which is simple, measurable, accountable, and things like that, organizations start faltering and the scores really go dipping down. And that's really your building block, because if you have a poor development plan, it will lead to poor development. What's important out here is how people are articulating their development needs and the actions they will take. It cannot be as vague as read a book if you have to really go about influencing someone. It has to talk about the tactics of development as to which book, what learnings out of that book you would want to go about. I remember of an example in a client situation, a participant based on the assessment data had to read 7 habits, but then the manager sat down and thrashed it out with him and said which of the 7 he would want to focus on in detail and how he would want to manifest that in his overall job. The second is really identifying the resources available for the learner, and that's also important, talking towards the barrier or the challenges that participants will require. Many times even the resources are not available. Then establishing an ongoing review process, again going back to the governance piece, where you have your senior sponsor and really the review is with them and then with the participants as well, to ensure that there is a complete process tension around this. And that's where you will have the fourth point realized, which is you are having the participants and the right stakeholders accountable towards building their own proper development. So let me just share with you this client story. So this client came to us almost 3 years back and said they had around 100 leaders, and said we would want to assess them to start building our future leadership pipeline, because many of their senior leaders were retiring in a couple of years, and they, through their backward calculation using human capital analytics, or you can say even succession benchmarking, they said in the next 3 to 4 years they would want their leadership bench to start performing. They wanted the leadership bench to be ready to take up senior roles as the leaders start retiring. So they followed a simple process with us, which we laid down for them, talking about starting with a development center for them with an individual development plan. So because it was a national organization, we had to train all the plant HRs as well on how do you help create good individual development plans. Then really the formal development and coaching legs were put in, and also the post-evaluation. So at the beginning of the journey itself, the organization identified certain competencies that were critical for the success based on the assessment data. And they went about setting up a benchmark saying, this is a threshold we would want to achieve in the next 2 years. They also set up another benchmark for themselves. They said that we want to build a coaching culture in our organization so that going forward we don't rely on any third-party organizations to build coaching as a competence. So really it became a two-pronged approach. One is to make them better leaders for the succession, and second is making better coaches out of them. Across the 18 to 22 months that the journey ran, through formal and informal training sessions, coaching sessions, there were many elements that we started off with but had to adapt on the way along with the client. As a result, at the end, when the graduation really happened, there were a couple of measurable impacts. Post the 360, we really found that competencies that were set as a target had anything between 15% to 35% jump as far as improvement is concerned. They also had some benchmark scores put up for building coaches, and 20+8 leaders, and the reason I split that like that is you had 20 people with 85% plus scores on coaching and 8 leaders who had 95% plus scores on coaching based on the coaching logs and various other measurement tools that we had used, and they were felicitated because now they are responsible for going ahead and developing the mid-level leaders in their organization. There were various other metrics like employee engagement surveys of the post and the pre compared to see whether the engagement levels in their departments are going up, because these were mid-level leaders handling larger departments. There were other things like retention of these leaders who were working in the journey were also looked at. So that's really the kind of impact study the organization realized. But it was really going back to the strong governance process. Every quarter, DDI had half an hour with the EXCO committee where we would review what's working well and what's not working well, and the CEO and his direct reports stood committed towards ensuring the success of this journey. And that's really what I wanted to share as to how you can build both the assessment and development together. Lastly, it's about really avoiding the risk. Now, what risk do you have as an organization? First, it's really risk about having these two great superheroes working in silos and never talking to each other. It's really about using that data from one to the other. Linking really your business critical needs back to your leadership capabilities, and that's, I think, one of the biggest points missed, as you see in the leadership forecast survey, that really less than 15% HR leaders have confidence in the future leadership capabilities of their organization, and only 40% of leaders speak about how they feel confident about building a higher level succession in their organization. So it's about linking your leadership capabilities to your business priorities. And lastly, it's really how do you build a streamlined process and avoid confusion or conflict between the two. So it's really, I'd like to give a message that how do you make this, both the engines work together smoothly and avoid the confusion as to how the data needs to be used and what next really people need to do. With that, I'd like to just end this presentation. Happy to take any questions. I know we have good amount of time left. Just wanted to share this perspective and rather would want to take more questions to answer.
Yes, Amogh, for sure we have many questions, and thank you so much for presenting such an insightful session. And let's move to question answer round. And our first question is from Jayashree. Jayashree wants to know how important are psychometric tools in the whole assessment process? Is it widely used for development?
That's a great question, Jayashree, and really I would give you a mixed response. But to start with, let me just expand the horizon of maybe the definition of the word psychometric. Now, if you define the psychometric in a narrow term more as a personality tool or a psychographic tool, then yes, it's used in assessment and in many times in development as well. It's a common practice in leadership development to pick up some psychographic tools, look at what your personality styles are, and talk about how this will impact in various leadership, areas. The most common one being around influence, emotional intelligence, or how do you really get along with others and influence others. Yes, but I would like to expand that horizon of psychometric and put almost all the tools in that basket. And here is a strong point of view from DDI that do not use a psychographic tool or a personality tool on its own. Use it with some form of competency data. Purely because it is always the behavior that manifests and we observe. So it's almost like that saying that I judge myself by my intentions, but I judge you by your actions. And that's where personality tool almost starts becoming like a horoscope reading, which tells you quite a lot of good and bad things, but no one knows how do I go about developing. So a short answer to you, yes, it's used on both sides of the table, but I would say use cautiously and always have other modes added to it.
Thank you, Amogh. I think Jayashree got her answer. Let's move to next question. Ramesh wants to know how reliable are assessment centers where individual assesses individuals. Is it not subjective way of assessing an individual?
Ramesh, actually, that's the right thing that you just said. While assessment centers in all the methods of assessment has the highest validity, however, yes, at times it becomes assessor dependent. It depends really sometimes on what side of the bed the assessor got up, or whether while assessing you, the assessor liked the conversation or even liked the person in general. That's where DDI has this point of view, and we moved away from on-the-spot scoring because we felt we are actually playing with lives of people and we should be more careful with that. So as a best practice that DDI lays down, we stopped doing spot scoring almost three and a half decades back, and we record the entire conversation, and then skilled assessors will play those tapes back, play the interactions back, score them, integrate them in detail, and create detailed reports to submit the proper feedback to individuals. So that's how DDI has made our attempt, and we have seen this work thus far of weeding out subjectivities of assessors.
Thank you, Amogh. That's wonderful, I think. Now, next question is why it is difficult to measure the impact of development, and we received this question from Nihal.
Sure. So Nihal, this is an interesting question, and really if you look at development, there are many angles that impact it, okay? Training is just one of them. And often it's expected that training works like a magic wand, where a person is dropped into it and taken out of that particular pool, and he is a changed life now. Unfortunately, the reality is, like any sport where you need to practice skills, you have to keep practicing in cricket your straight drive if you're not good at it. Same is the case with leadership. You need to practice your leadership skills, and that's where the gray area comes in. So various factors that affect is the managers, the conflicting priorities that participants have as far as their jobs and KRAs are concerned. Often, and the research says that less than 15% people take back learning in some shape, size or form and use it at the workplace. So it's really about how do you create a learning system which once a participant walks out of, knows clearly how do I really go about using that skill. This is known as behavioral modeling. If you would want to search more on this particular concept, DDI has been practicing that for the last 4 decades now. So all our leadership development programs that we do practices leadership behavioral modeling per se, and that's where we talk about how important is skill practice, not just in the classroom, but even after when you go back to the work floor. And that's where the manager's role comes into play. If you remember when I spoke about manager is number 1 and the number 3rd on the pre and the post part, or as far as importance for developing participants, managers need to build a segue for developing leaders. If managers don't keep that as their top priority, they will end up getting pulled down and doing jobs for others. So how do they encourage people to do the development? So the example that I gave you, for instance, if coaching was a program that you had to do and you just huddle up all your managers on a webinar and tell them some key elements of the training program that the participants will go through, and tell them that this is your role as a facilitator of change, that once these people come back, hold them accountable to having conversations with their own team members on coaching, and just keep following up as to whether they are doing that or not. That's really about practicing the skills, and that's where you start seeing development. Now all these things become difficult in the real work environment because a common challenge that business throws back at us is this the only thing that we have to do? We have so many other things, we have to meet our targets, and hence they are not very happy trying to do these things. Change is difficult and often pushed back hard, and this really is one of the major causes.
Thank you, Amogh, for answering this one. And we are receiving a lot of questions for you. So let me shoot the next one. Tanvi wants to know which assessment tools help in identifying high potentials to avoid the misunderstanding of high performer being a high potential.
That's a classic question, Tanvi. Really, there is not a one right answer because it depends on a couple of factors. One, at what level you are talking about high potentials, because the definition, the complexity of your high potentials change from level to level, and so will the assessment tools and the stimulus and the complexities of your assessments. But this is what one organization needs to do, and if you are really grappling with this problem, if you can just visualize a virtual pyramid, and that's how all organizations are, where you are really pegging your high potentials today and where you want them to be developed for tomorrow is really the potential. What often happens, and the conflict for the high performance confusion with high potential is, people say this, he is a high performer, hence he needs to get promoted. If you go back to a study that DDI had done a couple of years back called as the first rung study, it had a high correlation between high technical performance awarding highest promotions. So it's really that quandary that we are talking here about. But high potential is really pegging the person to that next level and then simulating that environment to see whether the person can really scale up there. And that's how you need to look at different levels and the complexities changes. Ritu, the next question?
Yes, Amogh. The next question is from Shivani. Shivani wants to know, is it possible to have a similar impact of AC, DC through online assessment? Also, what are the measures which can be used to make the online assessment as effective as AC, DC conducted in a room over 2 days with participants?
Sure. So Shivani, the real answer lies in what kind of tools you are talking about. Are the online tools that you are talking about are forms of test which are objective questions, or are they forms of assessment centers itself? And really both of these exist in this world at this point in time. You have some form of online assessments as well, but largely most of us know about online assessments in the form of tests. Now, like I told earlier, assessments have the highest validity compared to any other form of tools. So it really depends from level to level. At DDI, we have a point of view that as you start going higher in the organization, more assessment center, which is face-to-face based assessments, is valid. And at the lower levels, you can start compromising on that one and look at cost-effective tools which are either test-based or online competency assessments and things like that. So it really depends on the level again. However, that's really about the validity part. There is limitations of test compared to assessments, because if you have 4 choices to choose from, people are smart enough to weed out the obvious 2. And then it's a 50-50 guess there. Yet, there are good tests which have conducted validity studies comparing performance on the job to the higher correlation on the tests. So there are some like that as well, but it's a difficult element to build in.
Thank you, Amogh. Our next question is, should an individual development plan be flexible or rigid? If flexible, how do you decide the extent of division from where pre-decided plan?
So you really can't have a moving target, otherwise you will achieve nothing. So in that context, it has to be rigid, at least as far as the development objectives need to be agreed upon. How you reach that destination is dependent on the learning style of individual and the organizational offerings. It could be a mix of classroom-based, experience-based. Recently, organizations talk about creating immersion experience, taking them to either best-in-class service hotels or maybe some factory visits and things like that, and draw parallels from there towards their learning. So it depends on learning styles of individuals. Many times what we have seen is while development plan will have development tactics penned down, as you progress, you might realize some are working and some are not, and you might want to alter few of those. So in that format, it's slightly fluid, but the development goals cannot be fluid. They have to be finite targets.
Okay. Thank you for answering this. The next question is, should the assessment dialogues between the assessor and assessee be shared with the manager, or should be kept confidential? What's your take on this?
So here I would say it's really the maturity of the organization as to what's the culture that organization have. We have seen organizations who would say we would want to keep it masked and not share with managers because they can use that in their performance discussions with participants, which is not advisable. We have seen matured organizations where they say that let's share it with the managers as well because they are equal party in the leadership development. So it's really the stage your organization is in. It's almost something like even the 360 degrees. In some cultures 360 works, some cultures 360 doesn't. Similarly, some cultures sharing reports with managers works, and some cultures it doesn't.
Absolutely, Amogh. Now, the next question is, how do you ensure leadership capability and business strategy tie together right from the beginning?
All right. So it's about how leadership capability and business results are tied from the beginning, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So it starts with first understanding the business requirements or the business priorities itself, and then having a discussion with the senior leadership to cascade it down, saying if these are the business priorities, then what competencies do we need to develop in our leaders? Assess leaders on those competencies, and then build on what are the strengths and the gaps in your learning and development initiative and work from there. Eventually, because you have started with your business priorities and link that to the competencies, once you start developing those competencies, it eventually starts linking back to your business priorities and the business results. That's where the research that DDI spoke of, that 2.3 times financial metrics jump that organizations has realized.
Thank you. Thanks, Amogh, for this. I'm getting a lot of questions, so I'm shooting to you one by one. Our next question is from Anant. Anant is saying, apart from 360-degree feedback before and after the development intervention, are there any other methods which can be used to measure the success of IDP implementation?
So these are two separate things, Anand. While 360 is a very common one used, if you are just looking at IDP implementation, there are various other things that can be done as well. Okay, it could be anecdotal feedback from participants, managers, and the direct reports of an individual. It could be building a simple survey around the development priorities and building a pre-post around that, which is not really a 360-degree. It could mean really linking it back to your engagement surveys, like I showed you in the client success story. So there are various ways in which you can measure the impact. So 360 is just one of them.
Okay, absolutely, Amogh. Our next question is from Anurag. Anurag is saying, if you have a tip, one of the tips on how to create a good IDP, what would be that?
Google up SMART objectives. That would answer it all for you.
I think that answers Anurag's question. We have one more question from one of participant, Nihal. Nihal is saying, will the participants be comfortable to freely talk about the barriers, especially when their managers are the roadblocks?
So that's where the role of senior sponsors come into play, as to asking people candidly while building their development plan as to what are some barriers they think and how we can help them remove that. So there is a bit of communication that you will have to do across but on this particular one. But your question is valid. Yes, in some cultures it might become difficult to get a straight answer on this. In many cultures in today's day, especially many IT organizations, they can speak about something like manager being road barrier comes in very openly. So it is cultural, but if you have the right senior sponsorship support, you can really manage that. And it's at the end of the day not to really pin down somebody to say why you are not providing support, but it could be that just manager is too busy. So the senior sponsor can have a conversation with the manager that while this is what the feedback is, how best can we ensure this guy can develop, because it looks like he's keen on doing it. So that's where I would say.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amogh, for answering this. Our next question is from Neha. Neha's question is, what kind of benchmarks can be set for competency needs like leadership or analysis skills?
I didn't get that question. Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, sure. Neha is asking what kind of benchmarks can be set for competency needs like leadership or analysis skills.
All right. So Neha, there is not really a right or wrong answer in this, but it depends again on what is the leadership threshold you would want to set in your organization. So just to give you an example here, there are some organizations who have these competency frameworks which are a 5-point scale, and for every level of their organization, and they would say that at this particular grade or band, the leader should demonstrate this levels of skills. While the threshold skills are this, but because he is a senior leader, we would want him to go 2 steps beyond. So that becomes their benchmark. But what we have seen from organization to organization, these benchmark changes. There is not really like a global benchmark. I'm not trying to pick 2 different organizations or nothing against one or the other. But if you have to pick an organization which is an old economy, slow moving organization compared to a new economy, IT kind of an organization, you might have different leadership benchmarks. As simple as old economy will look at 45, 50 years for a mid-level leader, whereas an IT organization might look at 36, 37 and will expect possibly higher skills and competence on analysis and leadership because the customers demand so. So it is situational in that context.
Thank you, Amogh. Our next question is from Monica. Monica is asking, is there a way to evaluate effectiveness of assessment tools or programs? Is there a standard ROI measure?
So, effective measure, could you just repeat that one again?
Yeah, sure. Is there a way to evaluate the effectiveness of assessment tools or programs? Is there any standard ROI measure for it?
All right. So as far as assessment tools or programs is concerned, this is really a clinical or industrial psychological question that you are asking me. And yes, it requires a lot of study and validation and norming required for building the effectiveness of these tools to answer your first part of the question. As far as building standard ROI, well, organizations have to wait for a good amount of time, maybe a year or 2, to really see what they had assessed, whether that's giving the ROI or not. And that's where if an organization has a practice of building custom case studies immediately for assessments, you would really not know the validity of it and what animal you have created and whether it's giving the right impact.
Thanks, Amogh. Now our next question is from Pooja. Pooja is asking, behavioral development takes a long time. How does one measure it to show the progress?
That's again a good question, Pooja. Yes, behavioral development does take a long time. Like I mentioned earlier, you require constant practice. And it's really like building muscle memory. and I think all HR professionals are aware of this concept of unconsciously incompetent and moving towards unconsciously competent, the 4 quadrants out there. So literally behavioral modeling works in that format. When the person comes in the classroom, many a times they are unconsciously incompetent about their skill or competency that they are possessing. When they are exposed to a positive role model, they start realizing and consciously they become incompetent about it. When you provide them with a tool, a model, and ask them to practice, they consciously start becoming competent. Now, when they go back to their workplace, they are still in that particular quadrant. And it's only over a period of time that they will move towards unconscious incompetence. What you require to do is build in enough measurement and process tension, building that accountability piece that we were talking with the managers and the senior sponsors, to constantly keep doing a dipstick. So for example, if you say your development overall initiative is 1 year, then don't do an evaluation only at the end as a post-mortem to see whether you have a pass or a fail, but have some interim dipsticks at every quarter to see whether you are on the right course. If not, what course corrections need to be done, and then execute that so that the next dipstick that you do gives you the positive impact in that. So it's really a process to measure through, and that's where I was talking about more than 300 impact studies that DDI has conducted. It's really in that kind of a format.
Thanks, Amogh. Our next question is in continue with the last question only. It's from Ravish. He's asking what should be the ideal timeline of assessment and development process overall?
So Ravish, at each level it depends. At junior levels, we have seen the journeys are shorter because the skills and the competencies required are simpler. At senior levels, it's slightly complex and complicated. As you start going towards the top, it becomes even more critical. So there, the journey can stretch up to, so from junior level, maybe 3 months to 4 months. At senior levels, depending on a couple of factors, the competencies that needs to be developed, the succession pipeline timelines that you have, it could be 12 months, 15 months, 2 years, depending on the organization. But if you really have to draw a simple continuum from 0 to 10, 0 being least developable and 10 being most, all competencies really fall on different sides of it. Some of them fall in between, some of them fall more towards 0 and 1, some fall more towards 10. And then your development duration really depends on that. So competencies around executive disposition, building energy and passion in people, these are very difficult to develop, some almost towards not developable in some cases. Competencies like people management, coaching, interviewing skills are developable, and they are towards the higher side of the spectrum. So the journey really depends on what your output comes. So often clients ask me that we are conducting an assessment, how long the journey should be. My simple answer is I cannot tell you right now sitting here. Let's wait for the assessment data to tell that. But let's communicate to people that this will follow with a development journey for sure.
I think, Amogh, that was a wonderful answer, and thank you for taking that question. As time constraint, I am just sharing the last question with you, and we have many more, so I can share with you, and you can, I think, take them offline. Is it fine?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So our last question for today's webinar session is from Runal. He's asking, developing leaders within a time-consuming process and it's conflicting with the final outcome is not appreciated well at the sponsor's level. So what precautions should do HR need to take on this?
See, often, Mrinal, the challenge is the senior leadership don't know why the development initiative was crafted in first place. If you have them involved in the crafting process by linking all your development initiatives to the business priorities and showing them a natural linkage item by item, saying if we do this development then this lever gets pulled, you get their complete buy-in, and second is the senior sponsorship support. It should not be just a lip service that I'm here, it's important and you guys should develop, but how the leader is committed towards helping you develop themselves as well. So if that's not happening, then you will always have this blame game.
Thank you, Amogh. And with this question and answer session, we are going to wrap up today's webinar. Once again, we thank today's webinar partner, DDI and Conference Board. Finally, our very special thanks to Amogh for his time and invaluable information that he had shared with us today. And I would like to thank everybody in webinar audience for participating in today's web session. We'll come back to you with many more. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great evening ahead. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.